What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is March 5th, 2026, about 8:30 p.m. where I'm at right now, and we are continuing our 19th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 4 and the finale of Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative? A book that was requested by my long-time subscriber and friend and supporter, Nelson Moreno. And if you have any other books that you think we should react to on this channel, let me know in the comment section. Shout out to Mariana Moldovan. She says, yes, I love you. I love you too, Mariana. I love all of you out there. And I love all of you that are coming here to support this content. So I appreciate everybody who's going to show love and jump into the comments. I will be reading them, giving you a shout out if you have something to say. But today we're going to be picking up where we left off about last week. Last week we started reading this book, but then I had to stop because I have to catch up with school. I got a lot of things going on with school. I got to pass. I got to graduate on time. So I took some time off. Shout out to Eva Toth up in the chat as well. All the people that are showing love. I appreciate all of you coming in here to this live stream. Shout out to Monica Tenyi. All right, this is a lot of females up in the chat. Okay, interesting. Hopefully y'all are interested in the studies of capitalism, our new neoliberal corporatist world, and what we can do to change it. This is a socialist channel, if you don't know. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. But I appreciate all of you for coming in, showing love, and letting me know what you think of this content. So without further ado, we're going to be reading the final 2 chapters of this very short book that's less than 100 pages, actually. We should have been finished this. But the last 2 chapters are Chapter 8, There's No Central Exchange, and Chapter 9, Marxist Supernanny. It's only about 20 odd pages or so we will be getting through that. I suggest everybody go watch the previous episodes of us reading Mark Fisher's text and dive into it. Tell us what you think about it in the comment section. Without further ado, let's jump into Chapter 8, There's No Central Exchange. So, although excoriated by both neoliberalism and neoconservatism, the concept of the nanny state continues to haunt capitalist realism. The specter of big government plays an essential libidinal function for capitalist realism. It is there to be blamed precisely for its failure to act as a centralizing power, the anger directed at it much like the fury Thomas Hardy supposedly spat at God for not existing. Time and again, James Meek observed in an LRB piece on water privatization in Britain, conservative and labor governments have discovered that when they give powers to private companies and those private companies screw up, voters blame the government for giving the powers away, rather than the companies for misusing them. Meek was visiting Tewkesbury, one of the British towns that was the victim of serious flooding in 2007, a year after the disaster. On the face of it, the flooding and the consequent failure of services was the fault of privatized water companies and house builders. Yet Meek found that this was not the way that most of the local residents saw it. In Tewkesbury, Meek wrote, in general, there is more hostility towards the government, the council, and the Environment Agency for not stopping house builders than there is towards the house builders for building houses or buyers for buying them. When insurers raise their premiums, more blame is directed at the government for not spending enough on flood defenses than at insurers for raising the premiums, or at people who choose to live in a flood-prone valley but don't like paying extra for it. Very interesting. So that's a very interesting part of human psychology. We get mad at the government for not defending us from predatory lenders or predatory insurance companies, rather than the insurance companies that raise prices and premiums when our houses get flooded or when fire comes or some type of disaster. Very interesting. People are more mad at those that don't defend them than actually the people that harm them. Very interesting. Anyway, This syndrome was repeated on a much grander scale with the disaster of a different kind, the bank crisis of 2008. The media focus was on the excesses of individual bankers and on the government's handling of the crisis, not on the systemic causes of the crisis. I don't for a moment want to excuse New Labor for its part in such disasters, but it has to be recognized that focus on government, like the focus on immoral individuals, is an act of deflection. Scapegoating and impotent government running around to clean up the messes made by its business friends arises from bad faith, from a continuing hostility to the nanny state that nevertheless goes alongside a refusal to accept the consequences of the sidelining of government in global capitalism. A sign, perhaps, that at the level of the political unconscious, it is impossible to accept that there are no overall controllers, that the closest thing we have to ruling powers now are nebulous, unaccountable interests exercising corporate irresponsibility. A case of fetishist disavowal, perhaps. We know perfectly well that the government is not pulling the strings, but nevertheless, the disavowal happens in part because the centerlessness of global capitalism is radically unthinkable. Although people are interpolated now as consumers, and as Wendy Brown and others have pointed out, government itself is presented as a kind of commodity or service, they still cannot help but think of themselves as if they were citizens. All right. Shout out to Nelson Moreno up in the chat. He says last chapters today. Absolutely. We're reading the final two chapters. And I find it very interesting the point Mark Fisher is making here. Mark Fisher is saying that people's relationship now to their government is sort of very contentious in the fact that they don't actually expect government to be there for them to help them, at least in the Anglosphere. And in this case, he's talking about Britain in particular. But I would argue that this sort of sentiment exists in the United States as well. Every year, we deal with horrific things that the causes of global warming are reaping on us. Where I'm from in Louisiana, we have wild tornadoes that come through and tear up people's houses. All throughout the South, we're in the hurricane zone where every year we get battered and battered and battered with new storms. We just saw a few years ago people in North Carolina with 3 teeth in their mouth were complaining that their whole house got flooded. You get what I'm saying? And still, what do we do in America? We defund FEMA. We say that the government has no business up in my business, et cetera, et cetera. So I get where he's coming from. But yet and still, people want things done for them. They just don't have the, the words to express that they want a government to serve them. Or they think somehow that's somehow shameful. I will continue here. So the closest that most of us come to a direct experience of the centralessness of capitalism is an encounter with the call center. As a consumer in late capitalism, you increasingly exist in 2 distinct realities. The one in which the services are provided without hitch, and another reality entirely, the crazed Kafkaesque labyrinth of call centers, a world without memory, where cause and effect connect together in mysterious, unfathomable ways, where it is a miracle that anything ever happens, and you lose hope of ever passing back over to the other side, where things seem to function smoothly. What exemplifies the failure of the neoliberal world is to live up to its own PR better than the call center. Even so, the universality of bad experiences with call centers does nothing to unsettle the operating assumption that capitalism is inherently efficient, as if the problems with call centers weren't the systemic consequences of a logic of capital, which means organizations are so fixated on making profits that they can't actually sell you anything. Very funny right there. That's some dry humor, very dry British humor right there, but very funny. Continuing, the call center experience distills the political phenomenology of late capitalism, the boredom and frustration punctuated by cheerily piped PR, the repeating of the same dreary details many times to different poorly trained and badly informed operatives, the building rage that must remain impotent because it can have no legitimate object since, as is very quickly clear to the caller, there is no one who knows, and no one could do anything even if they could. Anger can only be a matter of venting. It is aggression in a vacuum, directed at someone who is a fellow victim of the system, but with whom there is no possibility of communality. Just as the anger has no proper object, it will have no effect. In this experience of a system that is unresponsive, impersonal, centerless, abstract, and fragmentary, you are as close as you can be to confronting the artificial stupidity of capital in and of itself. So basically what he's saying here, if you want to experience what modern late stage capitalism is like, just call up, I don't know, your bank, or try to call up Apple or any type of technology call center that you need help with one of your products that you bought, and figure out how quickly you're going to be just, in a loop of nonsense, and how you're wasting time and nobody seems to know anything to get things done. Now, I'll be frank. I've had bad experiences with call centers, and I've had good experiences with call centers. Recently, I made a call for one of my friends to get his bike fixed, and it went pretty well. The person on the other end was literally a person who picked up the phone and said hello. But then again, we were calling a small bike shop. Let this be a large mega corporation, and watch how quickly. Press 1 if you want it in English or Spanish. You press 1 and then it's like, press 2 if you want to go back to it's just a mess. You get what I'm saying? I wonder if he's going to talk about how when you pick up the phone now for the call center, it's, hello, sir, how can I help you? You know what I mean? I wonder if he's going to mention that as a part of capitalism as well. Not for me to bring that up to be racist or xenophobic. You know what I mean? That all these call centers are sort of exported to the third world or the global south, mostly in India. But that's a part of it as well. The part of modern late stage capitalism is the idea that you can oppress and exploit the global south. So I wonder if that's going to be mentioned. Anyway. Call center angst is one more illustration of the way that Kafka is poorly understood as exclusively a writer on totalitarianism. A decentralized market Stalinist bureaucracy is far more Kafkaesque than one in which there is a central authority. Read, for instance, the bleak farce of Kay's encounter with the telephone system in the castle, and it is hard not to see it as uncannily prophetic of the call center experience. There's no fixed exchange with the castle, no central exchange which transmits our calls further. When anybody calls up the castle, from here the instruments in all the subordinate departments ring, or rather, they would ring if practically all the departments, I know this for a certainty, didn't leave their receivers off. Now and then, however, a fatigued official may feel the need of a little distraction, especially in the evenings and at night, and may hang the receiver on. Then we get an answer, but of course, an answer that's a practical joke, and that's very understandable too. For who would take the responsibility of interrupting in the middle of the night the extremely important work that goes on furiously the whole time with a message about his own private troubles? I can't comprehend how even a stranger can imagine that when he calls up Sordini, for example, it's Sordini that answers. Kay's response anticipates the bewildered frustration of the individual in the call center labyrinth. Although many of the conversations with call center operatives appear Dadaistically nonsensical, they cannot be treated as such, cannot be dismissed as being of no significance. I didn't know it was like that, certainly, said Kay. I couldn't know of all these peculiarities, but I didn't put much confidence in those telephone conversations. And I was always aware that the only things of any importance were those that happened in the castle itself. No, said the superintendent, holding firmly onto the word. These telephone replies from the castle certainly have a meaning. Why shouldn't they? How could a message given by an official from the castle not be important? The supreme genius of Kafka was to have explored the negative atheology proper to capital. The center is missing, but we cannot stop searching for it or positing it. It is not that there is nothing there. It is that what is there is not capable of exercising responsibility. The problem is addressed from another angle in a paper by Campbell Jones entitled "The Subject Supposed to Recycle." In posing the question, who is the subject supposed to recycle? Jones denaturalizes an imperative that is now so taken for granted that resisting it seems senseless, never mind unethical. Everyone is supposed to recycle. No one, whatever their political persuasion, ought to resist this injunction. The demand that we recycle is precisely posited as a pre or post ideological imperative. In other words, it is positioned in precisely the space where ideology always does its work. But the subject supposed to recycle, Jones argued, presupposed the structure not supposed to recycle. In making recycling the responsibility of everyone, structure contracts out its responsibility to consumers, by itself receding into invisibility, has never become more clamorous. In her book, Frames of War, now, when the appeal to individual ethical responsibility has never been more clamorous, in her book, Frames of War, Judith Butler uses the term responsibilitization to refer to this phenomenon. Basically, the idea that everybody is responsible for everything all around them. We're all responsible to recycle. Never mind that the companies, these major corporations, produce all this plastic and chemical waste and all these things that are all nearly unrecyclable. So, continuing here. Judith Butler says, it is necessary to wager instead on structure as at its most totalizing. Instead of saying that everyone, i.e. every one individual, is responsible for climate change, we all have to do our bit. It would be better to say that no one is, and that's the very problem. The cause of eco-catastrophe is an impersonal structure which, even though it is capable of producing all manner of effects, is precisely not a subject capable of exercising responsibility. The required subject, a collective subject, does not exist. Yet the crisis, like all the other global crises we're now facing, demands that it is constructed. Yet the appeal to ethical immediacy that has been in place in British political culture since at least 1985, when the consensual sentimentality of Live Aid replaced the antagonism of the miners' strike, permanently defers the emergence of such a subject. Similar issues are touched on in a paper by Armin Beverangen on Alan Pakula's 1974 film, The Parallax View, which sees the parallax view as providing a kind of diagram of the way in which a certain model of business ethics goes wrong. The problem is that the model of individual responsibility assumed by most versions of ethics have little purchase on the behavior of capital or corporations. The parallax view is, in a sense, a meta-conspiracy film, a film not only about conspiracies, but about the impotence of attempts to uncover them, or, much worse than that, about the way in which particular kinds of investigation feed the very conspiracies they intend to uncover. It is not only that the Warren Beatty character is framed/killed for the crime he is investigating, neatly eliminating him and undermining his investigations with one pull of a corporate assassin's trigger. It's that, as Jameson noted in his commentary on the film, the geopolitical aesthetic, his very tenacity, quasi-sociopathic individualism, make him eminently frameable. The terrifying climactic moment of the parallax view, when the silhouette of Beatty's anonymous assassin appears against migraine white space, for me now rhymes with the open door at the very end of a very different film, Peter Weir's The Truman Show. But where the door in the horizon opening onto black space at the end of Weir's film connotes a break in a universe of total determinism, the nothingness on which existentialist freedom depends, the parallax view's final open door opens onto a world conspiratorially organized and controlled as far as the eye can see. This anonymous figure with a rifle in a doorway is the closest we get to seeing the conspiracy as itself. The conspiracy in the parallax view never gives any account of itself. It is never focalized through a single malign individual. Although presumably corporate, the interests and motives of the conspiracy in the parallax view are never articulated, perhaps not even to or by those actually involved in it. Who knows what the Parallax Corporation really wants? It is itself situated in the parallax between politics and economy. It is a commercial front for political interests. Or is the whole machinery of government a front for it? It's not clear if the corporation really exists. More than that, it is not clear if it aims to pretend that it doesn't exist or to pretend that it does. Go into the comments. Nelson says, did Acty and I review The Truman Show? No, we didn't, though I saw the film, and in my opinion, it's one of the better Jim Carrey films. if I remember. I was never a big Jim Carrey fan, even though I grew up in that era of The Mask and Ace Ventura and all that. Never quite found him funny. Never quite found Jim Carrey all that convincing or funny. But The Truman Show is a classic. Truman Show is a classic. If you know any of, you know what, I saw Eternal Sunshine on the Spotless Mind, and Jim Carrey's in that, and I like that. Though I remember liking it. I can't remember every single detail of the film, but I remember watching it and liking it. But if you ask me more about Jim Carrey, I couldn't tell you much more. I never found him that funny. Oh, you know what I did like? You know what? I take that back. I saw Me, Myself, and Irene. The more I start thinking about it, the more I kind of like Jim Carrey. Now that I think about it. So Ace Ventura, The Mask, not my cup of tea. Me, Myself, and Irene, one of the funniest movies of all time. That shit is hilarious. Me, Myself, and Irene is a dope-ass, funny-ass movie. Anyway, sorry. I liked him in The Grinch, says Nelson. Okay. I don't think I saw The Grinch. I think The Grinch came out a little bit after my time. By the time The Grinch came out, I was probably too old to be watching like Christmas cartoony type movies. You know what I'm saying? So, but maybe I'll check it out. Maybe I'll check it out. But anyway, continuing here. So, there are certainly conspiracies in capitalism, but the problem is that they are themselves only possible because of deeper level structures that allow them to function. Does anyone really think, for instance, that things would improve if we replaced the whole managerial and banking class with a whole new set of better people? Surely, on the contrary, it is evident that the vices are engendered by the structure, and that while the structure remains, the vices will reproduce themselves. The strength of Pakula's film is precisely to invoke the shadowy, centerless impersonality proper to a corporate conspiracy. As Jameson observes, what Pakula captures so well in The Parallax View is a particular kind of corporate affective tonality. For the agents of conspiracy, Sorge, concern is a matter of smiling confidence, and the preoccupation is not personal but corporate. Concern for the vitality of the network or the institution, a disembodied distraction or inattentiveness engaging the absent space of the collective organization itself without the clumsy conjectures that sap the energies of the victims. These people know and are therefore able to invest their presence as characters in an intense yet complacent attention, whose center of gravity is elsewhere, a rapt intentness which is at the same time disinterest. Yet this very different type of concern, equally depersonalized, carries its own specific anxiety with it, as it were unconsciously and corporately, without any consequence of the individual villains. Without any consequence of the individual villains. How that phrase resonates just now. After the deaths of Jean-Charles de Menezes and Ian Tomlinson, and after the banking fiasco. And what Jameson is describing here is the mortifying cocoon of corporate structures, which deadens as it protects, which hollows out absence, the manager, ensures that their attention is always displaced, ensures that they cannot listen. The delusion that many who enter into management with high hopes is precisely that they, the individual, can change things, that they will not repeat what their managers had done, that things will be different this time. But watch someone step up into management, and it's usually not very long before the gray petrification of power starts to subsume them. It is here that structure is palpable. You can practically see it taking people over. Here, it's deadening judgments, speaking through them. For this reason, it is a mistake to rush to impose the individual ethic responsibility that the corporate structure deflects. This is the temptation of the ethical, which, as Zizek has argued, that the capitalist system is using in order to protect itself in the wake of the credit crisis. The blame will be put on supposedly pathological individuals, those abusing the system, rather than on the system itself. But the evasion is actually a two-step procedure, since structure will often be invoked, either implicitly or openly, precisely at the point where there is the possibility of individuals who belong to the corporate structure being punished. At this point, suddenly, the causes of abuse or atrocity are so systemic, so diffuse, that no individual can be held responsible. This was what happened with the Hillsborough football disaster, the Jean-Charles de Menezes farce, and so many other cases. But this impasse is it is only individuals that can be held ethically responsible for actions. And yet the cause of these abuses and errors is corporate, systemic, is not only a dissimulation. It precisely indicates what is lacking in capitalism, what agencies are capable of regulating and controlling impersonal structures. How is it possible to chastise a corporate structure? Yet corporations can legally be treated as individuals. But the problem is that corporations, whilst certainly entities, are not like individual humans. And any analogy between punishing corporations and punishing individuals will therefore necessarily be poor. And it is not as if corporations are the deep level agents behind everything. They are themselves constrained by expressions of the ultimate cause that is not a subject, capital. Very deep. That was probably one of the deeper chapters. I will probably have to reread that, to be absolutely frank with you, because there's a lot that he's saying there. But what I'm getting from reading that is essentially like, neoliberal capitalism that we're living under right now loses all sort of sense of like centeredness. In the previous chapters, Mark Fisher was talking about how capitalism moved out of the factories and sort of disseminated into the service sectors in the first world, right? So like, it was understandable that the factories are going to move to Mexico, to the Philippines, to Bangladesh, etc. And now in the core worlds, in the first world, right, people are now disseminated and spread out in precarious job positions everywhere. And there is no sort of like center where you can go to and say, this is the blame for the problems, like you can in the factory or in the manufacturing space, right? You can go and say, here at this job, we are underpaid, overworked, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you do have some of that with the Amazon warehouse and other, large jobs that now people are working in the Western world and stuff like that. But even the Amazon warehouse job is precarious. The workers there aren't unionized. Things are just sort of like, built with the high turnover in mind. People are supposed to come in and come out, etc. Right? And so that's what I'm getting mostly from that chapter, that capitalism has become sort of a decentralized, nebulous, formless force that sort of churns people in and out. And that's just the way it's going to go. All right, going to Nelson Moreno. He says, he's saying as a decentralized system with no center, which makes it feel impossible to confront. And that is capitalism, says Nelson Moreno. And I agree with that. That's what I'm trying to say. Nelson just said it in better words than I could. You get what I'm saying? But that's what I'm getting from that chapter, right? Just he used it in a much more grandiose, verbose, purple prose type of way, which I guess that's appropriate for the purple tie. Purple prose for the purple tie. Anyway, this is the final chapter of Mark Fisher's book that we're going to be reading right now.